Welcome to Maximum Impact Episode 1 with your host, Allan Isfan, engineer, entrepreneur, innovator, and pragmatic futurist. After 25 years of success building and growing tech-based startups, I've realized that humanity's future is in the hands of innovators and entrepreneurs. I created this podcast to bring together the brightest minds in the areas of personal development, exponential technology, and business to help entrepreneurs train their minds, launch and grow disruptive businesses that make our world a better place. This is the very first podcast, and I am super excited to kick it off. Now, most of the podcasts will be interview style with some of the brightest people in the world, but also be doing some solo rounds just like this one, probably about one a week or so. Now, the idea behind Maximum Impact in this podcast has been ruminating for about a year. I had the absolute privilege to attend an exclusive mastermind event last spring that's run by Jason Gaynard, and got to meet some amazing podcasters that I've been listening to already. Jeremy Wise, John Corcoran, James Altucher, Jordan Harbinger, John Bowen, Isaac Jones, and even Tim Ferriss himself. Now, with some encouragement and support from some of these guys, including a bunch of Skype calls late at night, I made some really huge decisions in 2015. The first and biggest one, I suppose, was leaving the company that I started back in 2006. It was just time. My partner is now running that one successfully, and I'm moving on to new things. One of the others was launching Maximum Impact. Now, the goal of the Maximum Impact podcast is really to bring together the brightest minds in business and technology, as well as personal development, to help tech-based entrepreneurs achieve success. If you're already part of a tech-based startup or considering launching one, this podcast is for you. Be forewarned, though, it's going to be a little bit different. When I first got started in business, I literally quit my job and jumped in head first. I had recovered from a debilitating autoimmune disease called myasthenia gravis, and I was on top of the world. I was just so happy to recover from that. And, I'd never failed at anything and felt invincible. I had observed many people launching and running successful businesses, and they were getting rich and appeared to have all of the freedom we all dream about. How hard could it be? Well, sometimes reality can just punch you right in the face. It was way harder than I expected. And, to be honest, I wasn't prepared. Olympians don't just decide one day they're going to stop everything and compete in the Olympics next week. And yet, entrepreneurs do this all the time, and it explains why most businesses don't survive. I think I had a warped view of entrepreneurship when I started, and the reality really cleared that up pretty fast. So, Maximum Impact in many ways is what I wish I had access to when I started. An aggregation of the best advice from today's luminaries, organized as a guide. Based on hundreds of books, thousands of podcasts, and my own business experience over the last 20 years, I've boiled down the principles into 5 key principles, actually. The acronym CLEAR. So CLEAR stands for clarity, learning, exponential, acting, and rituals. I really believe that if you apply these principles each and every day, you will achieve your goals. So let's dig in. Let's start with number 1, clarity. Don't wish it were easier. Wish you were better. Jim Rohn. Now, Jim is one of these guys that, a lot of people talk about. He's influenced guys like Tony Robbins and many, many others. And, he and others really believe, and myself as well, that, as an entrepreneur, your brain is your engine. And an engine that runs at peak performance is key to success. And for it to run at peak performance, it needs to achieve clarity. So this is the step that I skipped when I launched into business, and it cost me time, so much money and stress. I just dove right in, and now I know better, so I'm going to share all of that stuff with you guys. This category is kind of focused on activities that help entrepreneurs achieve clarity so that they can build the right products and make the right decisions along the way. Thousands and thousands of decision points in a business. We're going to explore fascinating topics like meditation, which has been huge for me, and many, many others, sleep, building habits, health, even biohacking, and achieving flow state so that we can all just get into the zone and do the best work of our lives in record time. Olympians know how to do this, otherwise they couldn't compete at that level. And knowledge workers just generally don't. So let's study this together and bring some of the smartest people in the world to help us figure out how to achieve flow. All right, number 2, learning. The one thing that I've learned is that success can be a bad teacher. Perhaps you did great in school or you worked for a company when you became a superstar and thought those same skills would transfer directly to business. Worst of all, those successes can lead to a false sense of security. And you think you could just hustle and work harder. Those things are valuable, but it's not enough. Sorry to burst your bubble. It just doesn't work that way. Running your own company requires an incredible range of skills, and I guarantee you that if you don't learn them as quickly as possible, you could end up in a world of hurt. 90% of businesses fail, and that happens for many reasons. Think of it as a leaky bucket. You might have a great product, but zero marketing skill. Or perhaps the product is good, sales and marketing is great, but you have no financial modeling skills, so you can properly track numbers, and you run out of cash and your business is done. Even if you end up delegating or hiring people to handle some of these tasks, you still need to have some depth in them. So you got to learn every aspect of business, in my opinion. Now, my learning over the last 20 years has come from some key areas. The first was, just doing it. When I was in college, there's one company that I wanted to work for, and they didn't have headcount, so they couldn't hire me as a student, but they had budget. So I started a sole proprietorship called Semicon Auto Test, and I got my co-op term, taken care of. That was the first company that I started. So just doing it is the best way to learn. But there are many other ways as well. Books. I've read hundreds and hundreds of books on topics ranging from philosophy to sales, marketing, general business, meditation, health. I'm going to share some of the most impactful ones with you, and I'm going to bring on as many of the authors as possible onto the podcast. I now read about 4 books a month, some on paper, many of them on Audible. Either way, I just can't stress enough how important books are. The ROI is truly absolutely incredible. Now, podcast has been the thing over the last 5 years that really got my attention. I mean, so much incredible content, all for free. You can listen to in the car while working out, being on an airplane, on a train. Sometimes I'll listen to that in bed before, going to sleep instead of, keeping the light on. I'm going to share some of the best podcasts and hopefully we'll be able to interview a bunch of the creators as well. Mentors. I've had mentors all along, from early managers to a year when I was an entrepreneur in residence at a venture capital firm after I quit my job to launch my own startup. I still call on those mentors when I have questions or big decisions or just need some help. Sometimes, quite frankly, I'm just scared. I got a huge decision to make, something I've never done before, and I'm just not sure what to do. So I call up on those guys. Once in a while, it's guys like Leo Lax, who was at the venture capital firm. He had brought me under his wing as a young lad, and I'll be forever thankful. I couldn't have done it without these mentors. Now I've added some new ones to the list. One of them in New York, and when I'm stuck and really need to make a big decision, I'll drive down there for the day or 2 days and have a chat with them. It really helped me last year make some huge decisions. So mentors, should not be ignored. If you don't have any, start looking right now. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Exponential thinking. Virtually all of today's big successes like Tesla, Uber, Airbnb are the result of exponential thinking. It's the blending of exponential technologies and ideas to create something new. Now, exponential concepts are really hard to fathom. Most people think linearly, in a straight line, basically. Now, exponential growth is tricky, so let's just take a bit of an example here. So let's say you start with 1 penny, and you double that to 2 pennies in year 2. and then you go to 4, 8, 16, 32, all the way to 2024 after 10 years. So after 10 years, you started with a penny and you ended up with $10. Whoopie ding dong, you don't even notice that, right? You're never going to get rich at this rate. Well, you'd be wrong, because now it starts getting interesting. Over the next 10 years, then $10 turns to $10,000. It's not bad. That's a down payment on a car. Then the next 10 years, 10,000 turns into over $10 million. And another 10 years takes you to 10 billion. So that same doubling in the first 10 years, you barely even notice it. But over 40 years, that penny turns into $10 billion. And again, as I say this, it's just hard to believe. But you know what? 40 years is less than a lifetime. So, that's how you get from the printing press to a man on the moon, and now the entire world's knowledge in your pocket and computers that can beat humans at chess. We are now riding that steep part of the curve, and technology is accelerating. I mean, we're going to just see some incredible things over the next few years, and a great, great time to be in business. Ray Kurzweil, one of today's most respected inventors and futurists, predicts that in 15 to 20 years, we'll have the solar panel technology to power the entire Earth. Now, how's that possible when today we're at 1% or so? Well, it's exponential math at play here. Solar installations have been doubling every 2 years or so, and the improvements are accelerating. The technology is getting better, which means that each square foot of panel is generating more electricity, more efficiency, and they're getting cheaper because of manufacturing improvements and volume. So next thing you know, you double, and then you hit the knee of the curve when boom, it just goes almost straight up. Now, exponential thinking isn't just about technology. It's also about how you think in terms of execution. So we'll talk a little bit more about that afterwards. But let me give you an example. Uber combined personal cars, so your own car, with mobile phones and big data, with people's desire for a flexible way to make extra cash, especially after the most recent financial crash. I mean, it was a perfect storm. It's a disruptive idea that really came about through exponential thinking and idea sex, which I'll talk a little bit more later. Today's companies are able to reach billion-dollar valuations in record time and with way less overhead than before. Airbnb, for example, is today's largest hospitality company, and it owns no hotels. It had under 1,000 employees, I think somewhere around 600 or 700, when it crossed the $10 billion valuation mark. It achieved this in about 4 years. That's incredible. I mean, if you were to plan that out, I don't think you could ever imagine that would happen, and it's happening all the time. Something fascinating is going on. Now, you don't have to necessarily want to be building a unicorn, to take advantage of this, but this is how these unicorns came to be. So there's really something to be learned here. So exponential thinking can really be applied to how you build your company, like crowdfunding your startup or product, using services like 99 Designs and Elance to staff your company in a flexible, super scalable way. A friend of mine owns a company with hundreds of people, and these guys are distributed all over the world. That allows them to find the best people for the job, regardless of where they were. And in order to achieve that, he's built out some incredible tools to track everything, to ensure everybody can communicate. And I suspect that his company is better organized, the communication is better than most any other company that has all of their staff in one place. It's hard to believe, but it's absolutely stunning what he's been able to do. Now, let's get to the last section. Action. We'll be learning a lot in this podcast about achieving clarity, acquiring knowledge and learning, exponential thinking, but none of it matters if you don't act on it. Startups are really hard, and I can tell you, I've felt the punches. Most fail, and I just don't want anybody listening to this podcast to have to go through a failed startup. Now, it's going to happen, but it's never something that we wish. So there are many steps to get right, and I want to start going through some of these here. You need to start with a good idea, the ability to test it before even jumping into the development phase, prototyping early versions and market testing those before going on to full development and massive investments. Obviously, they need to go to marketing and sales, raising money in some cases, then scaling the company. Oh, and then often, even when you get to that point, you realize the initial idea is actually not the right thing, and you really need to pivot to something else. And you're like, the train is moving at full speed here. In fact, there was a company way back called Odeo, and the founder, had another idea that he thought had a lot more traction. He had proven it, and he offered his investors all their money back, which they took, and they launched Twitter. So the hardest part is really getting the timing right. The predecessor to My Van Apps, the company that I launched and ran for many years, started with a concept that was probably about 15 years too early. That was about 10 years ago that I launched the company. The timing might be right in maybe 3 to 5 years from now. That's how easy it is to get the timing right. You get an idea in your head, the world is going that way, but you can't quite figure out how fast it's going to move. And often, in many cases, it's slower. In other cases, it's faster. It's just so hard to get a read on the timing. So, on this category of action, my goal is not necessarily to provide a step-by-step guide, but rather to bring your attention to some novel approaches that are still not second nature to most of us. And I know they work because I've lived them, for many, many years, and so have some of my colleagues. And again, I'm not trying to pretend I'm the guru here in any way. I'm going to be bringing on people onto the podcast that truly are the gurus in each of these sections. So, here's a short list of things that what I'm talking about here. Lean methodology. Now, I know it might be second nature to most people listening to this, but most people still think lean means working with a limited budget. It is not that. I mean, that's part of it, but it's really, there's so much more to it than that. So I'm excited to be digging into that with you guys. Ideation, coming up with ideas, often through idea sex. One idea combines with another, and you just keep building on that and, pivot and pivot and pivot. Testing before you even have a product. Most people don't think of doing that. Prototyping the concepting and making sure that people are actually willing to pay for something before you blow thousands or millions of dollars on the idea. Marketing, but organized through traction channels. Great author and great book on that topic that I'll be hopefully bringing on. Very, very fascinating, and I've applied those lessons many times. Targeted advertising. These are the types of ads that follow you everywhere, and they work extremely well. Dashboards and KPI tracking, so key performance indicators, something that I really didn't know anything about until my last startup, and really got drilled into me by my business partner and our angel investors. And I don't think I could live without a dashboard anymore, especially in this fast moving world. Now, there's lots more topics that fall into just general business fundamentals, traditional sales techniques, lots of great books on that, marketing, all very, very useful stuff. So I'm going to do my best to point you to those resources because there's so many of them out there. But in the podcast, I'm going to prefer to focus on the more novel approaches that are really working well, that have been proven, but that most companies just don't know about. Hopefully I'm going to bring on as many of the leaders in these areas as possible onto the podcast, so you can really hear directly from their experiences as well. I know these techniques work, and I'm just excited for you guys to learn about it. And last and not least, probably the part that I missed completely early days in my career is rituals and habits. I guess you could maybe summarize those as discipline, but it's not quite that. I always thought rituals and habits were for cubicle dwellers, that they were, anti-creativity, not a startup thing at all. The messy desks were a sign of a creative mind. I was completely wrong. I always just worked harder. That worked fine for the first 10 years of my career, but I was more curious than most of my colleagues, and I worked harder, and I out hustled most of them. But as I got into more senior roles and eventually the CEO role, and then layering on top of that a vibrant family and building a house and all of the other craziness of life, just working more hours was just no longer possible. I was exhausted. I was working till 2 or 3 in the morning every day, not working out. I was waking up early with the family and getting the kids off to school and such. And then I would just fumble through the day in a daze. I could not sit and focus on one thing for even 30 minutes. Just be bouncing around from one thing to the next. I realized that scaling the hours was just not possible. And I really had to figure out how to get more out of every day, which meant that I had to get more out of every hour. So in addition to some of the things we talked before, like a daily meditation practice, a regular bedtime, healthier decisions, I really started to experiment with diet, with priority on mental clarity. For example, I love bulletproof coffee. I've really moved to a really low carbs kind of a diet, not so much for weight loss, but just to keep the mind clear and be able to just get a lot done throughout every day and getting up really, really early at about 6 a.m. right now, moving that to 5 a.m. I use the Pomodoro technique religiously every day. People kind of laugh at me at work a little bit when my bell goes off, but basically I work 25 minutes nonstop on one thing with 5-minute breaks in between, and typically I'll do multiple 25-minute sessions on the exact same topic. So I'll spend hours working on one thing and just get it done. Things like speed reading that is gonna, has allowed me to really read a lot of books. I also been using Audible on speed talk, sometimes 1.5 to 2x times. Chunking tasks versus just a list of to-dos. Oh my God, it's been an absolute game changer. So just sticking to the same areas of interest or the same groups of tasks all at once rather than bouncing around all over the place. Prioritizing tasks, not from the most urgent to the least, but rather from the hardest to the easiest. Basically getting the hard stuff done first. And now shifting that a little bit more to identifying the most impactful things that, what are the things that I can learn about, my job or what it is that I'm trying to achieve that is really going to help me do a step function in ability to get that thing done. Sometimes it's automating tasks, sometimes it's delegating, but, really focusing that first thing on the day that basically says, how can I do my job better? Uh, something that I learned from some of the stuff that James Altucher has been talking about around daily idea capture. He says to write an idea 10 ideas every day, and so I'm doing that with in my Evernote app. Keeping a social capital journal, identifying who are the people that I need to get to know to achieve my goals and the actions to make that happen. And one of those is organizing mastermind dinners that I learned from Jason Gaynard. He's got a great book out there that I really recommend. I'm doing those every couple of months, and I'm going to be shifting that to monthly. I'm using Evernote religiously to keep my brain clear. It's just been huge. I love Moleskine and I love writing in that, and I still do when I'm trying to be super creative. I'm trying to sketch out ideas and inventions and so on. But almost everything else in terms of notes and meetings to reports to my daily morning rituals, everything is done in Evernote. It's an absolutely fantastic tool. I started waking up early and just forcing myself from being a night owl to a morning person, which I never thought would happen. And I'm going to be pushing that earlier and earlier. I'm going to be pushing that to 5 a.m. and possibly even earlier. And now I've kicked off something called the Morning Miracle, something that I learned from Hal Elrod. I highly recommend his book. I had the pleasure of meeting Hal, just a great human being, at a mastermind event last year. And the Morning Miracle has just been a game changer for a lot of people. Highly, highly recommend it. I think the biggest part of all of this kind of stuff is really that, when you set yourself some really big goals that you want to achieve, you just have to achieve, that you can't not achieve. You have to commit to them and to the process. How are you going to get there? And it took me a long time to realize this, but ultimately, you have to define the habits and rituals that you need to execute every day, so you get at least 1% better and get that much closer to the goal every day. And that includes Saturdays and Sundays. I'm recording this podcast right now on a Saturday. Now, I am still very much on the learning curve, and will probably not get off of it. I mean, I'm certainly not a guru in each of these areas. And that's why I'm launching the podcast. I want to bring on the gurus that are going to, tell you straight out based on their own experiences, how they came across these discoveries, and hopefully you can check out some of their stuff as well. So, I'm really excited to share this journey with you guys through this podcast, and some of the other things I'm going to be announcing soon. And, if you're getting value from the podcast, I really would ask you to review it on iTunes or wherever you discovered the podcast, and probably even more importantly, share it with friends. I certainly would appreciate it, and I think your friends would appreciate it as well if you saw value in it. So before you go, I'd like to invite you to check out the first interviews that are live. Now, to kick things off, I had the absolute pleasure of speaking with Jay Sammet, author of Disrupt You. Now, Disrupt You is one of the best books I read all year. No surprise. I mean, Jay is an incredible innovator and a successful entrepreneur, and he's got so many great stories. We'll talk about some of them in the podcast, and I also recommend his book. I guarantee that you're going to get a ton out of that first interview. And by the way, that was my first one ever. So other than a few Skype issues, I think we did all right. I also had the pleasure of speaking with Tomek Cisak, an expert in 3D printing, among many other things. I also spoke with Jeffrey Hazlett, one of the guys that I go to when I'm stuck. Sometimes I'll just drive to New York to chat with him, and he always has the time of day for me. So appreciative. You might recognize his name from The Apprentice and Bloomberg TV. Jeffrey was the chief marketing officer of Kodak when I met him, and he now runs the C-Suite Network, another company as well called Tallgrass PR. He's a best-selling author, keynote speaker, and just an incredible human being. Lots more podcasts are on the way, and I'm just really so excited and so happy that you were able to stick around to the end of this one here, and I look forward to more. Until next time.